slide, this is the link we'll show multiple times throughout this presentation of where you can find your materials. The California PBIS Coalition is an organization using evidence-based, culturally relevant practices, building capacity for all the stakeholders of implementation of PBIS as a multi-tiered system following the national blueprints for PBIS for professional development, implementation, and evaluation. Big thank you to Stephanie Tegg at Santa Clara County Office of Ed for the vision to launch this series of webinars. Currently today, we had about 359 folks registered for this, so we know that the need is getting met out there. So welcome, we're happy to have you. Today, myself as well as Natalie Sedano will be presenting. I'm Cami Murphy, a program manager for prevention and intervention at our Desert Mountain SELPA. And with me is...
Good afternoon, everyone. Natalie Sedano, Prevention and Intervention Lead Specialist with Desert Mountain SELPA.
Awesome. So our organization is the California Association of Health and Education Linked Professionals or Professions, and we are the Desert Mountain SELPA, the Desert Mountain Charter SELPA, as well as we have the Desert Mountain Children's Center, which is where we have school-based mental health clinicians that operate out of that. So that is our organization in a nutshell. We are on Zoom, so we are recording currently, just letting you know that. Most of us have been on so many, too many to count Zoom calls, but in case you're looking for the controls, if this might be your first one or one of the very few that you're on, at the bottom of your screen, we have actually muted all participants as we're on this call. There's a lot of people. And so we'll be using the chat feature to interact as a community. We have a couple polls and breakout rooms that we're going to be utilizing, but we'll definitely tell you how to do that once we get to those points. So make sure you're using your features that you can see here. So the expectations for online trainings, we thought this was appropriate for this particular training, as well as for the trainings that you are probably doing with the schools, staff, with the school staff that you're working with, if you're an educator in a school or a district, or with your students. And so we really like these. This be respectful, mute yourself when you're not speaking. We've actually done that already. We had the controls on this side. Looking into the camera, wearing appropriate clothing makes us laugh every single time, but we've all been part of all of those little memes that show people that keep forgetting they're on video. If you are on video and you would like to not be because you have it set up for speaker view, you can turn your own video off down at the bottom as well, and you'll see where that is. You'll still be part of the webinar. So being responsible, we started on time, turning your video on when possible if you want. Those breakout rooms are a great space for that. So we'll say that again before we do a breakout room, and that way you can see who it is you're talking to in a smaller group like we would in a big training. And the chat feature. Being safe, setting up your work environment to take a call, and helping others navigate virtual meetings. So we are in this meeting together today. Again, welcome, but we thought these would be useful for you as you go out and are using those with your school staff. Here it is again. I saw it already pop up in the chat. We have some additional team members working in that chat box. Shout out to Athena and Karen for that. Here is the tiny URL, and it is available on the California PBIS Coalition website as well. So you'll be able to see that and click to that to get these materials. The outcomes of this training, it is an hour. So it is really an overview, lots of key topics, some key points that we're going to talk about. This is a lot of work to really implement interconnected systems. But for the outcomes of this webinar, we really want to make sure that for interconnected systems, for school-based mental health and PBIS, that we're building capacity among school staff to support all the students, especially those at risk for mental health challenges. We want to talk about the importance of integrating the PBIS and school mental health implementation across using an interconnected system framework, and to incorporate the social emotional competency instruction into a school-wide teaching matrix. We've seen an increase in the need and the demand for social emotional learning, especially as our world has gone so virtual recently. And then creating this integrated system to create the school culture and climate that promotes wellness of that whole child. Triangles. We've seen lots of triangles. This is the one we use in our office, the interconnected multi-tiered systems of support, really showing that we have those 3 tiers of social, emotional, academic, and behavior. And we have very tiny lines between those in the diagram we use, really to show that it goes in between all of these. It's not just one of the areas or the domains. That social, emotional absolutely fits in with academic and behavior. And so we use this as a good reference in our office to really help us identify what it is we're talking about. We'll do that again today as we speak to you. We know that PBIS in and of itself is a multi-tiered systems and fits in our LCAPs in this way. We just wanted to show that again as we are in California and the priorities are shifting. And so we want to make sure that we're identifying where it fits in those plans that we're writing for the funding that comes behind that. So how you doing? I love that. That's really kind of a fun one. We're going to just throw up a poll here really quick and have you answer that. I'm going to launch that poll. On a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with interconnected system framework? Got about 75% of you that have already answered, so we'll wait till we get a few more results. We know how to move this webinar forward. A few more responses. We have about 82% voted. 2 more seconds. All right, let me end this polling here, show you what this result is. All right, so let me share these results with you. You can see what that looks like across the participants today. So we have about 31% saying they're not familiar with that term. I saw that pop up in the chat box as well. We're gonna really dive into what that looks like. 25% said barely familiar, 22% somewhat, 19% familiar, and about 2% implementing. And so we will go into some detail as much as we can again in this very short time frame about what it is, where you can find the resources for it, and where to move next. So for our team, we are a center that provides support out of a regional center. And if you could click to the next slide. Thank you, Natalie. And so for our team, we had to make some decisions. And I wanted to just kind of use this as an example as we talk today about what this interconnected system is. We often talk about silos. So we put a picture of silos up here, working toward similar goals, but really working separately. In our office, we have lots of departments, much like your office or your school site, lots of people working toward the same thing, but not necessarily working with each other. So the team structure in our office was a PBIS team, as well as we got new funding, which happens all the time, new funding, different funding. And for us, it was a grant, and we created a triage team. For us, that was kind of working against itself because we had similar members on both teams and we weren't working together. And so what we did to interconnect our system is on the next slide, and it shows that we really identified different team roles and responsibilities and put it together to have a prevention and intervention team. Your team will look different than our team. We were taking some of the foundations of this interconnected system for the work that we were doing together, saying we absolutely are implementing using data, which we'll show in just a second, using data from our school districts that we provide support to and the schools that we're working with, as well as the roles of building capacity in the school site and using this new funding. So we wanted to make sure we were effective and efficient using our own data to guide us, so we weren't that organization saying, hey, you should do this, but we hadn't done it ourselves. So I show you that as an example. We took a look at the data. So we'll show you in just a second about what that data looked like for our team. But we really want to make sure that you're aware of and or understanding some of the work that is occurring down in our area in San Bernardino County. We're up in the high desert, which is a unique geography for California, if you're familiar with what that looks like. Natalie's going to talk about some of the drivers for behavioral health.
So it's kind of the why. Why are we looking at things differently, right? And especially in this time and age, things happening, you know, and here's an example of what this can mean. So with, in the last 10 years, suicide has leapfrogged cancer and unintentional injury and become the second leading cause of death for youth, and young adults. In California, there's been a 50% increase in mental health days for children between 2006 and 2014. ED visits increased by 71% for impulse control disorders for children ages 1 to 17 years old. 37% of students with mental illness ages 14 and older drop out of school, the highest dropout rate of any disability group. Half of all lifetime mental illnesses begin by age 14. Again, really saying how do we look at being that first responder, right, in addressing needs and really being preventative in all this work. Recently read that referrals of mental health are expected to go up 400%, right? And that's huge. And so what, as a school site or a district or even technical assistance center, what does that look like as the new way of doing work and really the way we support our students? And so we're gonna have a quick poll regarding some facts about mental disorders. So Cami, if you can roll that. So which of these disorders are the most commonly diagnosed in children? And please select all that apply. Yeah, we could see ADHD is pretty up there, anxiety, behavior disorders. Wait till we get to at least about 80% there voting. A few more. Right, okay, so we'll end the poll. Oh, sorry, a few more votes there. All right, we'll go ahead and end the vote. That's okay. So what we have is ADHD, 91% we're saying that's commonly diagnosed. Anxiety is about 74%, depression is about 54%, behavior disorders, which is pretty broad, right? The 75%. And so if we look at this, so ADHD, behavior problems, anxiety, and depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders in children. And really it depends on our scope of our work, what we're seeing in the classroom, what we're seeing outside the classroom, and just a lot of factors that really are giving our students some difficult challenges, right? There's a lot of things that are really affecting our kiddos. And so what can we do really when we talk about this different way of work or this new lens that we need to look at supporting our students? So here's some just local challenges being from San Bernardino County. What we know is we have 50% of foster children in San Bernardino County are placed within a 30-mile radius of Victorville, which is huge. We do have a high foster youth population. 13.2 of children in San Bernardino County have a parent incarcerated. And when we're looking at poverty, 9.1% of children live in poverty, live in deep poverty in California. However, when we look at a scope of San Bernardino County, we have 12.2% of children in deep poverty and 17.6% of those children in deep poverty in Victorville. So again, just a local city in our area, but this is the challenges that we are facing in our, as Cami was noting, in our unique geographic area. And so what does that look like when we're talking about cost-saving benefits of intervening early? And we know that, right, as educators, we're in there, we're trying to support as best we can with those systems that we do have. And we know estimated annual cost of mental health disorders in the United States for individuals under the age of 24 is $247 billion. We also need to look at how our mindset is changing when we're talking about at high risk, right, or at risk. And really what we want to say is use our language to really look at promise. In Illinois, I just learned they use the word at hope. And I appreciate that, right? We need to look at how we look at not deficits of a student, but really what are things that we can really highlight for that student. We can look at to really put in those protective barriers, right, to supporting our students and our families. So I'm going to have Cami introduce.
So especially during this time, this is work that we've been doing pre-COVID. So I know that the chat's getting monitored in there, and we'll go back to that to make sure we can answer some questions as well. Thank you for that. Pre-COVID, we've been trying to interconnect and add more social emotional learning and add more mental health supports in a way that is effective for the clinicians providing supports and their limited resources, as well as the educators providing education during the day. And COVID has really just thrown us into just a unique lens. And so not to sit there too long, but a heightened level of interest in mental health, and every single one of us in America and internationally that are involved in this have some new level of concern. Here's a video from one of our local high schools. It's called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. It was produced out of one of the high school classes. And it is a huge representation of, it's only 1 minute, but it's a huge representation of what's going on right now.
It's okay to not be okay. Listen, life sucks sometimes. Life can be hard, life can be difficult, and sometimes you just don't want to go through it anymore. But trust me, whatever you're going through, whatever it may be, it's going to end. And there are people who are going to help you through that. There are people who want to help you through that. And while it may seem like life is horrible and it's the worst thing, trust me, life can be beautiful. Life can be glorious. There is so much to enjoy out there. And there are people who want to enjoy life with you.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay to not be okay.
How powerful is that for us as grown adults to hear? It's okay to not be okay. So I'm going to give shout outs to Matthew Biandara at Apple Valley High School. So go Apple Valley High School, and with full permissions to use this right now. And that is just a huge example for us to just sit on right now and know for us as well, it's okay to not be okay. However, as educators and mental health providers, we as well have this responsibility to make sure that we're noticing earlier, that we're able to provide those resources as early as possible. And that's why this interconnected system is really so important. Currently, because of that video, and some of it has some pretty powerful messages, we're gonna use a breakout room just for about 5 minutes with these two questions. What stood out for you? And if you had knowledge of another person's experiences, would it change the way that you respond to individuals? And so you'll be assigned a breakout room, you join it, you go back, it'll give you the instructions on the screen. Athena has put those questions inside the chat, so you'll be able to take a look. So I'm gonna do that right now, and we'll see you in just a second. Let's see. Should have opened this a second ago. Here we go. Looks like we have about 40 more people, maybe 140 more people joining back from breakout rooms. If you could go into the chat bar, and if you are able to just kind of write some of those key points down that you talked about, that what stood out for you, and or if you had knowledge of another person's experiences, how would that change the way that you respond to individuals? So while you're waiting for everybody to return and finish up their very brief conversation, if you could do that in the chat, that'd be ideal. Welcome back, everybody. It looks like you're all joining. So thank you so much. I know there was a lot of great conversation. 5 minutes is not long enough, but in an hour webinar, we know that we have to make sure that we're giving you opportunity to speak, as well as making sure that we give you enough information to be able to utilize. So in the chat, if you would, answer some of those questions that were talked about in your group. So Natalie, you and I maybe can read through what that looks like. So this one said someone in our group, let's see, let's go back up. Our group discussed the need to be able to know each other's story for building empathy in ourselves and others. Absolutely. And somebody rephrased, thank you, Christy. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to actually say that to people, and we should be okay with that. And then how might we respond to what that looks like? Hearing people's voices validating, I think that that's so true. Someone in a group shared that what stood out for them was that it was a male adolescent who shared the story. Absolutely, that's so key. And how are we asking those questions to everyone? What does that look like?
I love that the proximity builds empathy. Sharing our stories is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Highly recommend, if you're running that video, it is on YouTube. Give some kudos to the author there. There's a lot out there. I'm just sharing something that was brought to mind. So just so you know, the folks that were in your breakout room, that was just random. So thank you if you joined a little bit late and got put in. Thank you for just joining into that conversation. That happens when we're all together too, in rooms, right? So thank you for that. And the name of the YouTube video is It's Okay to Not Be Okay. That is what it's called, and it's Matthew Biandara. So we'll put that in the chat when we're done. All right, Natalie, let's see what that next slide says. So we're gonna take a couple deep breaths ourselves. So let's do that. In through our nose and out through our mouths. Are you ready? All right. We're going to resist the temptation to add anything new without considering. I appreciate in one of the first slides we were talking about the poll, somebody says, I've never even heard the term. When I'm in a space like that, my anxiety goes up a little bit. Like, I don't know, so I don't know where to put that. So we're not going to add a new something until we consider, what do our children need? Address the impact of the current effort. What are we actually doing? What are we doing right now that could be utilized in this situation? And is it working? Look to partners with common outcomes. We'll talk about some of those partners that have come alongside the work we're doing or that we've just tapped into, as well as assessing our own staff wellness. So as we sit here, we need to make sure we're checking ourselves and knowing where we are. Eliminate those efforts that aren't having an impact. Sometimes that's one of the hardest things to do. Like, well, we've been doing that for years. Yes, but we keep asking the same question about what else we need. And if it's not working, we need to know how to get rid of something. We don't want to hurt feelings, but we want to make sure we're rising up and meeting those needs of staff and students. Prioritize a prevention approach and then anchor to those core features of an MTSS or multi-tiered system of support, core features to align the work. When we do that, we know that on campus, we can do things already that support children with their mental health concerns. Standard, tier 1, we can do these things. I won't read through these because that would take away and just take some time, but look at what some of those key pieces are, some of those key practices. So actively monitoring and supervising to improve the quality of the settings in which we live, move through, and work, that's crucial. We know there's a webinar that's a little bit later this week, and I know one of their questions was, what kind of environment do you need so that you're effective in your own job? because most of us are telecommuting right now. We've not had to answer that question until now. Besides working at home and after work, now we're setting up home offices. I'm at my dining room table, not ideal. What do I need to help me in this work? Think about your students, it's the same thing. Also, the last one there talks about increasing our positive, supportive, and somebody's comment came up right over this agreement with Natalie. I can't see what that says right there. Can you just, I'm tagging you in. That something came up on the bottom and it took off my whole screen. There we go. I got it. Increase positive, supportive, preventative engagements. I was going to say that, and I thought it said positive, with children and youth with disabilities. So we want to make sure that we're increasing that relationship status between youth and the adults. What does that look like as the adult on campus? How do we increase the relationship with more students? That's a huge impact for them. In our office, I mentioned we looked at our own data. We looked at our data with PBIS. We've been implementing PBIS for years. Just saying we're doing it doesn't show impact, because we can all do something, but doing it with fidelity and measuring that in the fidelity of that, using our own data to guide that was huge for us. So we measured across all 3 tiers for multiple years and came to a point of saying, okay, now we can add more things to this multi-tiered system, or the PBIS framework, that included mental health supports. And so we were able to take a look at the fidelity using the tiered fidelity inventory, TFI, as well as we looked at our coaching supports, because we can be trainers. A lot of us are teachers. We can train. We can sit like this in front of a computer screen actually and train if we want. But that doesn't necessarily mean those receiving that are getting that. Same with our kiddos. So we looked at our coaching and what that could look like as well. So we took that data and made decisions for our own team. So there's another slide in there, Natalie, after that took a look at our data. That was just for us. What does our data say? Are we going alongside our districts as frequent as we need to be? How can we utilize those data points? Your data will look different. And taking a look at your own data is crucial. Now what? Natalie's gonna talk about that.
And that's where we come to the ISF monograph. It was really looking at what is available, what's out there. And so obviously with this ISF monograph coming out, we were excited, like, how can we take this and then apply it, right? And that's all what we want. We want those tools to move forward to see how we can do the work. So ISF monograph, it's great. It's pretty thick. It's pretty, I wish I could show you mine. It's my office, but it's flagged and tagged of just tons of resources, tons of ideas. It's a pretty heavy read. So all that to say, it does take some time to kind of go through that. We as a team were able to sit and do a book read, to be honest, because it really helped layer that lens of what is our current work. And again, what does that look like? Well, we're now layering in the mental health piece for our school sites and our LEAs. And so available, we have the link there. Midwest PBIS has a great job of having their own ISF tab and just additional resources. But that really is essentially what the ISF monograph is about. And again, encompassing different studies, different tools, and we'll share some of those tools here shortly. Susan Barrett, Lucille Ebert, and Mark Weist, excuse me, are really the authors and really doing some great work behind, again, the idea of how do we incorporate PBIS and school mental health. Recently, I believe this was last year, these interconnected system fact sheets came out, 101, 201, and 301, and these are great. We shared these with our school teams in a training, and it was really the idea, school teams sit together, we'll do a popcorn read, you guys will take some time to really dive into this, and these are great. We have also included these in our resources. So 101 is really, what is ISF? The 201 is, how does this look different in my work as an educator and as a mental health provider? And then the third one there is really, what data are we going to pull, looking not only at our school, but our community data? How are we going to select interventions? And again, what's the data that's really going to support that? And again, I highly recommend those. Really great, easy reads, and just something as you're developing your knowledge base, as you're looking at where does this all fit? And again, I'm really taking note of what Cami said earlier about not adding, but what are some things that we could really refine? That's what these fact sheets kind of get to do, have those conversations. And there's some really great questions incorporated there that really get those conversations happening about what are some next steps or things that we can do to adjust our own work. And really what it's about is a structure and a process, and that's highlighted there intentionally with those keywords: structure, process, including our stakeholders, and really having the authority. And that's really, if we think about MTSS, that's essentially what it is, right? A structure of how we're identifying interventions, what's our criteria, what's our process if there was a concern with students. I mean, all those things, again, in our PBIS language, our world that we constantly are using. Key stakeholders, who else do we need to bring to that table? And this has been a really magical, like we need to all come together. Again, when we think about the silo, the visual of the silos, but idea of how do we all come together and really having the authority, who can then make that decision where we need to look at things differently for students, for families, for our system at our school sites, right? And so that's all coming together and how we look at those different roles and functions of our staff, and also the look at what we do in terms of policy, right? And I'll share some examples of what I mean by that here shortly. So what are those key messages within that ISF framework? Single system of deliveries first. So again, the idea, we've been on numerous school sites and there's maybe a school climate team, there's a MTSS team, there's a PBIS team, there's maybe, you know, some mental health intervention supports that's happening on this other end. And so what we're trying to say is, well, how can we all come together to really look at this system of support for all? Because that number 2 really is mental health is for all. It is for all, even considering our staff, right? We are looking at different supports for when teachers return. How is that going to look for them? What supports do they need? So we need to look at encompassing our whole community. Number 3, success defined by student impact, right? I mean, again, we're looking at the data. We're looking at what are those successes that we're going to define for our students? What does that look like, right? And again, that impact, that huge impact that we can have. And then using the MTSS framework to guide an integrated approach. And when we think about MTSS, it's really those effective teams. But now again, we've added that layer of community mental health provider. Database decision making. Again, we're looking on beyond the scope of office discipline referrals, GPAs, attendance, nurse visits. Like, what other things are we looking at in our community? I think here in the high desert, when we're talking about incarceration, we have a federal prison, you know, several miles from a school site district. And so what does that look like for them? What data are we then pulling at that district to really look at that supports that are needed for students? A formal process for selection and implementation of evidence-based practices. And again, it's the idea of we need to take things slow, really to identify, is this a great practice to have? Or is it something we are just, you know, pulling off the shelf because someone said it looks great or it's packaged beautifully, right? And we tend to do that as educators. I mean, I'm guilty as a school counselor. Was like, hey, there's all these things coming my way and I just want to use that, but is it effective? And really, are we using it the way it's intended to be used? We're talking about early access, and really it's the idea of using a universal screening tool. And we'll talk more, Cami will walk through some tools. But looking at not only our students who have those externalizing, right, the ones that are maybe aggressive, that you can see those behaviors, but internalizing the withdrawn student, the shy student, what are we doing to put in those supports for that student? Rigorous progress monitoring, I mean, that's key, right? We need to look and see, are we doing this fidelity? Are we saying what we said we were gonna do? And is it being effective? And again, it goes back to how are we picking and identifying the best evidence-based practice for our students? And obviously that ongoing coaching, right? Again, with both the systems and the practices, we need to really monitor those and make sure we're cohesive, because if we have all of these, again, as educators, and I'm bringing myself into that, we have tons of great practices, and yet there's no system in place to really help and support that, then it's just gonna fall apart. Example, I had an administrator who check and check out was the thing, like every student he saw, check and check out, check and check out. Well, that's not effective. That's just harboring and creating not a system, but more of a quick Band-Aid. And we don't want that, right? We want a system that really is gonna help and support all our students in there and for staff as well. And so again, we love our triangles, but really when we think about it, it's that multi-tiered layer of support. What are we doing at that universal? Again, an example is universal screening. What's that targeted? What are things are we doing for that 10 to 15%? And then the individualized, right? Making sure we're looking at what specific needs are we meeting for students. And again, it's talking more about not just academics. We're really good at that, but what are we doing for social emotional as well as behavior? And
so
why?
Yeah, sorry, Natalie. Let's look to our community. So how do we partner effectively with our community and help us all come together to take a look at some of those decision rules that Natalie was talking about? So currently in this age of COVID, I'm going to use this as an example. So we don't have all the answers right now. We're all in this together, right? This is thing we've heard. It looks different all over. We might all be doing the same thing together, but the resources that are available certainly look different. And so in our community, we have some staff that's working on looking at what are the food banks doing right now? What are their hours that have shifted? What does that look like so that we can help our families that we work with our students, make some decisions around where to go for food, clothing, shelter, housing, all of those pieces. But really looking at some of those other organizations that have their own type of decision rules. There's a lot of nonprofits. Nonprofits are fantastic. Oftentimes those nonprofits have an outcome that's already been decided, and then they utilize their resources for this particular outcome. So how do we as a school system access those resources at the most appropriate time so that those families that are needing those resources aren't spinning? They're not just contacting it because that's the number that we're given. We know when to give them that number because we know when that level of service is most effective. And so how do we participate? We get with our community partners and help them make some decisions around that, or just learn their decisions so we make better decisions. One of the tools Natalie mentioned is universal screening. And so there are a lot of actual tools around universal screening. So those of you that might be new, if you could turn the slide, Natalie, for universal screening, when we think about vision or what have you, at certain ages in our school system, we're screening for vision, and it's very basic. When we talk about universal screening for behavior, which later this, on the 26th, actually, Natalie and Athena will be having a webinar on universal screening. We're talking about how do we screen early for behaviors that might be unidentified or under-identified for our students. One of the tools that's free that we often recommend, and there's a lot out there, is the student risk screening scale and internalizing and externalizing. Again, there's links there. And we really want to do some basic training for the educators, the classroom teachers that are filling this out, to explain to them what it looks like when we're identifying what those behaviors are. The work around this is something that you need to have a system in place for. Otherwise, there is a potential to cause not necessarily more harm. It will eventually work itself out, but we don't want the eventually to land on the shoulders of students or the faculty that is providing that support. So the student risk screening scale is something that you'll hear more about if you're able to join that webinar. Another tool to screen all students at one time is the ages and stages questionnaire. And that gets our tinies, our littles, our infants up through toddler, early childhood education. And so we want to make sure that we have systems in place for when we do screen them, now what? We can't wait until we screen to then decide. If you can imagine a school system that said, let's screen everybody for vision, but not have a plan of what to do after, and having to make that decision after. If we have 55 students on our campus that might need another layer of screening and we've not decided what to do we have to write letters out to all their families? Do we make those calls? If we've not decided ahead of time with the data we have, then we're scrambling again. We're already in that state unless we're screening like that. And so once we have some more of that data, there's a ton of other data that you could be looking at. So you could be looking at data sources from all of those areas in your own community. Natalie mentioned academic data. Sometimes that's just so much. We have so much academic data. So what decision rules do we use to help make those decisions around academic? Discipline, we've been talking about, attendance, that's huge. There's a lot of surveys right now, some free ones, of course, around the climate or the perception. PBIS apps has a lot that you could utilize around there, as well as how often are students out of class visiting the nurse, the social worker, the counselor. Myself and Natalie, of all the different jobs that we've held, we've both been school counselors with open door policies, and those open door policies meant we had students come see us all the time. The data sets that we both took when we were on site were totally different than now, and we really didn't track it like we really should have. To just say, how do we make sure that these students that are leaving class for any kind of reason, what are we looking at there so that we can make sure we can intervene where it's needed for the student success? Sometimes we look at screening from one view, and we definitely need to make sure that we're looking at it from multiple views. So we've talked about community, food pantry, and just looking at it from lots of views. Gone are the days of looking at one set of data and just making decisions based on that. So we'll utilize that work and actually ask the question, the big questions in the interconnected system. If we can look from the traditional way of mental health getting provided anywhere, but we'll speak mostly about school site. Traditionally, the mental health counselor would see, you see that's in quotes, see the student at an appointment. An interconnected multi-tiered system, the mental health person is on teams and at all tiers. Traditional clinicians only do, quote, the mental health, where in an integrated system, a clinician contributes to the integrated plan. They talk about those resources. What can we do at a lower level to help benefit that student? As well as in the traditional model, they do case management notes maybe only, and this interconnected system is where they're contributing to the fidelity and the data. So that's a training. What we've learned is that's a training for clinicians themselves. We have lots of clinicians that we work with, and they ask us, as well as lots of other resources, but if they know you, right, you have relationship, they ask, like, what does that actually look like? Because what we've learned is in a lot of the training from the mental health standpoint, is isn't necessarily something that comes while they're going to school. And so we're really working together and working differently. We know that schools are the de facto mental health, the de facto mental health provider. Students are at school. I saw in the chat, I'm not following that chat. We have others that are doing that, but now what? Now we're in school virtually. What does that look like? Those are great questions to ask. And again, depending on resources, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a new guide actually that just came out. I believe I got the link in my email yesterday from CAHELP, so I will try to upload that. I don't have it to put in the chat right now, but I just got a new brief that they put out, the Center in Social Emotional Learning, on now what for social emotional learning for students that are in a virtual world and staff. We know a lot of these statistics, Natalie talked about them, but if you think about the school system, often what comes next in a system for students that this is not as successful as it could be is the juvenile justice system. It's that next level, and what can we do to help prevent that? We know that suicide's the second leading cause of death, and this last bullet, the factors that impact mental health occur around the clock. So this says to me, we need to be effective in schools, absolutely. And we need to help our families and community be effective there as well, and help our students generalize some of those skills they're learning. So Natalie's example was spot on. Check in, check out. It has a purpose, it has evidence behind it, and it works when given certain situations, but it isn't the only intervention or the end all be all intervention for those around the clock. And so how do we help our students learn those skills and then generalize them to different situations? And how do we help our families learn those as well? We know that unless we're taking resource inventory, which the interconnected systems has lots of examples on where to check for your own resources, that we need to look at what we already have in place and where there are gaps. I think we've talked about this already. We'll move on. If we don't do this, we risk having students have some of those successes in the social emotional area that they need. And so if we're just focused on the academics or them in seat or showing up for their Google Classroom or Google Hangout, we're missing some pieces there. We know that the evidence of PBIS is so, it's lengthy. Here's just a few examples. It improves that academic achievement. There's examples of where that's found there. Reduces student discipline referrals and suspensions. This will be an interesting study to follow as we have students with 0 suspensions right now because they're at home, right? And so gone are those memes that the families they don't know what to do and bless the teacher and all of that. But wow, we know some of those behaviors, if this continues and we're virtual teaching next year or in the summer, whatever that ends up looking like, we need to be able to address that. There's some good tools. We also know that in implementing PBIS, it improves the social emotional functioning. So we are going to interconnect that with additional social emotional learning inside that PBIS framework. When we interconnect, all of those pieces that we've talked about, we're going to uncover earlier. Not only are we going to uncover earlier and just sit and know it, we're going to link them. We're going to link them earlier to interventions because we've decided ahead of time what those interventions could be instead of waiting. And we're going to track the data to make sure that we know that that intervention in our best use of data matches the need of the student. Guess what? It doesn't always. But unless we're tracking with data effectively, we're not going to know. And so we need to make sure that we're ensuring that that youth is receiving that intervention. We know it's going to expand those roles for clinicians. So expanding a role for a clinician, if I stopped there, that might make every clinician right now cringe, as some of them are learning to do telehealth for the very first time as well. It's not necessarily just expanding it to increase their hours in the day and all of that. It just expands what that traditional model looked like for clinicians that are working in sites to help all of those folks that are working with the kiddo in that mental health lens, so that they too can share in some of that guidance and overall improvement in a healthier school environment. If we don't do that, we know that some of these challenges might occur, that there's a constraint on too few school psychologists, counselors, social work. This is not new to those of you that are on this webinar, you know that. Also a constraint on the educators, because we want to make sure that we have time as teachers to teach the academics, which is what we went to school for. Well, we went to school for that, to be a teacher, but we have to shift our lens. When I went to school to be a teacher years ago as well, we had minimal classes on social emotional learning. It was later in my life that I learned about that social emotional learning myself, as well as how to implement that in the classrooms. And I'll tell you, I'm sitting on this webinar today, I'm pretty sure I didn't do a great job of that my first few years of teaching, because I didn't know differently. But now we know differently and we get to do differently. And that is what this is about. How do we do this differently and better? Because we know this, and so we get to do better.
All right, and so let's look at some examples. So this is a local district example, again, from our San Bernardino area, San Bernardino County, excuse me, high desert area. And so what they look like is obviously with PBIS implementation, and essentially that's the foundation to move forward, right? They looked at different levels of their strengths, what's happening in terms of their resources. They saw that there was an increase in students experiencing those adverse childhood experiences. They took a look at their school community data from their local behavioral health provider. And then they identified really who needs those more intensive supports, right? Additional the clinical support, coaching, academic coaching. And they went ahead and utilized the ASQ, or the Ages and Stages questionnaire. Ages and Stages questionnaire SE, which is again just an example of a universal screening tool, excuse me. And in terms of scaling up, well, before they really identified the need to screen students, they thought, you know what, we need to pause for a second. And really, again, they were transparent as this work group is coming together and looking at what is the system going to look like. I said, we need to pause and really look at cultural responsiveness. How are we identifying or under identifying our students? Is it over, under? We need to really pause and have those conversations, and really the coaching training for all our staff to be understanding of culture. And so that's something that they stopped in the midst of really laying out then universal screening. Again, just based on what that pulse was happening on their campus, and so their district, excuse me. So again, this is just a local district example of how they're really looking at those next steps when we're talking about ISF. Another school district example, they're looking at their teams, right? They're looking at the social emotional program that they used, really looking at identifying what is going to best support our students. And so again, they looked at what's the need at their elementary students. So those coping skills, emotional literacy, self-control. Secondary students was looking at curriculum with evidence-based of substance abuse. Looking at vaping was a big deal for some of the high school students, coping with anxiety, improving self-regulation and social awareness. But above all, they're using data to really guide and say, what are things that are happening on our campus? Because then we need to address that, and we need to look again at how we're looking at our systems and how we're looking at a support to bridge all that together in terms of supporting our staff and our students. These are steps that we took, again, when we're talking about what are those big next steps to help support our district charters and preschools. Getting to know your needs survey was really developed in looking at what the needs are of our community. I have Karen who's leading the charge on that, but that outreach opportunity that we're able to provide now to our families. Meeting with our leadership, we looked at what the TFI scores, the tier fidelity inventory. We looked at some tools, and I'll show you here shortly, the Appendix A from the ISF monograph. We looked at reviewing different universal screening tools. And again, we, next week, Athena and I will cover some screening tools, but there's tons out there. If one were to type in universal screening tools, a ton will come up. We just really identified that we're here to support in terms of community and family outreach, and just really get that rolling. And we are a technical assistance center, so we already have tons of trainings happening, but again, it's really meeting the needs of our LEAs. Where are we in terms of looking maybe at adverse background or youth mental health first aid? Where does it all fall in terms of the support that's needed? Here's one tool. Again, this is just one example of within the ISF monograph is Appendix A, and it's really a survey on school readiness. And even if we look at number 1, school staff apply PBIS principles to content areas other than their own, right? How are we plugging in those pieces? Here we have the third question. School staff indicate through survey, focus groups, etc., that interconnecting PBIS and school mental health will be beneficial to the following, right? And again, it just gives us a baseline of where we are feeling the pulse of what's happening on our campus. And I know we had some administrators take this particular tool and they were just blown away. Wow, this is too much. I don't know if we could do this, but it's really, let's pause and reflect, because again, it helps us inventory what are things happening, but also things that we can work towards, right? And so again, we're not rushing. This is not a checklist to get it all done, but really let's go slow to go fast, the idea of putting in systems before we rush in and grab those practices. Here are some examples, again, when we're talking about the silos, but how do we interconnect even our own team? We have our prevention intervention website along with our triage services, and really we're overlapping different supports, different resources, because we are interconnecting ourselves, our team. And so we're really definitely trying to build some of those resources and supports for our LEAs, and really trying to highlight as many great resources and things that we can pull to really show the work that we're able to provide. And I love this quote from Alex Briscoe. He's great in terms of really looking at how we do things differently in terms of funding and support with mental health. But his quote is, behavioral health is not simply a response to pathology, it is a strategy to achieve equity, healthy development, and systems change. And really that's what we're doing. We're trying to think outside this box as we're in this world. COVID-19 is happening, but even prior to that, right? We need to look at how we look at mental health and supporting our students and our families, and what does that really look like? Again, looking at the ISF to do that. Additional resources, we have our website on there, again, as well as PBIS.org has tons of great information. Again, I did note about the Midwest PBIS. Again, they have their own tab. Highly recommend as well the universal screening information from the CIA3T.org website. They just recently put on also a COVID-19 resources. That is great. Actually, you get lost in there. You get lost in all these websites, to be honest. Just a ton of great resources and different supports. So we wanted to share those with you. Other things as we're wrapping up here with a few minutes, 3 minutes to go. Just recognition process is different this year, but recognizing the work that's happening within the community. Very easy. So I would highly, please submit. It's great to see all the great work that's happening in terms of what's happening in our events of COVID. So feel free to apply.
It's easy, very simple. You just talk about what it is that you're doing in your community, take a picture, send a video, a few words, and we'll help you recognize them.
Absolutely. And then upcoming webinars, again, where you registered for this event, there's other webinars happening. And again, just highlighting if you're interested more in universal screening overview, that's taking place next week, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. And then we also have supporting social emotional behavior schools in the virtual classroom. So there's a lot of great stuff happening, as well as we're still pushing for the California PBIS conference taking place in Sacramento, September 21st to the 23rd. So save the date on that. And questions and answers from the chat. So if there's something, I'm going to pull up actually my chat and see if there's any questions. Anything, Cami?
There is a lot in there, and so maybe I know that we've had Karen, Craig, and Athena answering a bunch of questions and also adding to that the resources. And so what we'll do is we can save that chat and we'll make sure that those resources get posted alongside this webinar recording. It is getting recorded because that was a lot of the questions in there. I'll actually just pause to see Athena, Craig, does anybody have any specific question that you saw? There was a lot of chat.
I am going to highlight one question that I really loved. So we had showed the example of the triangle with these different interventions, and someone asked, how are we going to create these virtually? Mm-hmm. And I appreciated that because that is a big deal, right? I mean, how do we do that virtually? I appreciate Athena. She plugged in the SECO and what they're trying to do in terms of virtual. Another thing that I've seen and was something we're trying to replicate on our end too is a virtual calming room. I mean, just different ways that we can provide support to our LEAs, be it some type of music, some type of coloring pages. So I mean that is something we're looking at. But again, that's such a great question. And what is this going to look like, virtual interventions? And I think we're all trying to wrap our heads around what that may look like.
Can you go to the next slide, Natalie? Because we'd really like feedback on this webinar. It is a QR code as well. If you have or have not, you can click on the link, I believe, or copy it, or just open your photo app on your camera and it'll go in that QR code. We are taking that feedback very seriously and really want to make sure that we're meeting the needs during these webinars. And the PowerPoint is, I saw that from Tessa. Thank you for asking. Absolutely, the resources are posted on the link that was showed earlier. We can go there and just to thank you, Craig, who posted that back in the chat. California PBIS Coalition website will have all of the webinars and all those materials under the events, and you can see the webinars there.
The other thing I had mentioned, the 400, somebody asked, where can I find that 400 increase in referrals? And my plethora of articles, I will see if I can locate that, but I just want to highlight it wasn't COVID related, and that was something that they're fearful of. Obviously, we all are. What is this all going to mean for students? And so I will try to locate that in my plethora of reading. As my team knows, I love resources, and so I'll really try to locate that particular article. So bear with me as I try to dive for that.
And when found or if found, we'll put that with the links on the California PBIS Coalition webinars under this webinar here. Mm-hmm. Thank you guys all for attending. We'll stay on in case there's additional chat, or all your microphones are muted, so we can't go there, but I'm going to open my chat up as well. If you had any additional questions, please feel free to ask, and you guys have a great day.
Yes, thank you.